Hello and welcome to Experimental Gameology. Today we're going to look at Chainmail, the war game which is famous for being the ancestor of Dungeons and Dragons. You can buy the book from DM's Guild for just $4.99, and as I've done here, you can print out then the PDF. So a few basic concepts you need to understand to play Chainmail. First of all, there is not just one way of doing anything. I think this goes back to the old wargaming culture where people would invent rules in a sort of modular way and then put them together for their system. So for example, there are two different ways of initiative, if you like, of taking turns. There's the move-counter-move system, the simultaneous movement system. Similarly, there are different rules for morale under different conditions. And there are different kinds of combat detailed. So today I'm not going to look at everything because you don't need everything to play, especially not to play the fantasy game. So I'm just going to look at what you actually need to know to play a fantasy game of Chainmail. Now, the combat systems that you will need to play Chainmail effectively is the mass combat rules, and there's a table here at the back of the book. And as you can see, all types of troops are divided into 6 categories, 3 foot categories and 3 cavalry categories. So we've got light foot, heavy foot, armored foot, light horse, medium horse, and heavy horse. So any troop type, including fantasy troops, can be categorized in these categories. And this is essentially a combat matrix, right? So if you've got one unit of light foot fighting another unit of light foot, each gets 1 die, and if they roll a 6, it kills. Now we assume in this whole book, by the way, that we're talking about 6-sided dice. There's no use of polyhedral dice here at all. So that's the one thing. Now, missile is done separately, and the mass rules for missile, which you'll need, are over here. We've got missile fire table. Slightly confusingly, here the categories are different: unarmored, half armor or shield, fully armored. You probably should take those literally, like exactly what that troop has, but I guess you can also map those previous 6 categories onto here. So unarmored could be light foot and light horse, half armor and shield could be heavy foot and medium horse, and fully armored could be armored foot and heavy horse, I guess. I mean, you can see I put these my own notes here. So, and again, this is here you're rolling d6s again, and you've got how many troops you have firing, and then what target number they need to hit. Okay, so that's that. Now, the other thing you need to play the fantasy system is the fantasy table. So this is a 3rd combat system. So we've had the mass melee, we've had the mass missile, and then we have this fantasy combat table. So here it's only available to certain fantasy types, right? Not all the fantasy types can use it, and you have to read across. So you've got, for example, a dragon is attacking a giant, for example. Now here the numbers assume 2d6 and the total, and it says up here as well, if you score equal to, then you drive the opponents back. If you score over, then you kill. Now, interestingly, then we have a 12 here, so it's almost presumably a lycanthrope can never actually kill a wraith. They can only drive it back. Right, well that seems to be the case. Those are the 3 combat systems, and now we need to learn how to actually put them into practice. So for this, we're going to use one of the turn structure systems. I've only used the first one, the move-counter-move system. The simultaneous movement system sounds interesting, but it's a bit more complicated. You have to write things down. So in the move-counter-move system, this might be familiar to people who have played like the old basic form of D&D. It had a similar turn structure, probably based on this, but there are some differences. So kind of initiative, you roll a 6-sided dice, and the person with the highest score goes first. Now, if you draw, up to you, re-roll, maybe everything happens simultaneously. The rules are not clear on that. Anyway, if you win the roll, you choose whether to move first or to counter move, and that is a choice, and it has different tactical advantages. Then people move. It talks here about split moves and missile fire and pass-through fire. Basically, some troops can all troops can fire on other troops which move through their range, and some troops can move half and then fire again. Notably, in the fantasy supplement, elves can split move and fire. And then the other side moves, right? So far we've only had missile, like split fire and pass-through missile happening. Then artillery and missile fire happen. And for example, if you're playing wizards in the fantasy supplement, they can use lightning bolts, which count as cannons, and fireballs, which count as catapults. And so that would then count as artillery, I guess, although it's kind of not that important, as the rules say here. Artillery and missile happen simultaneously and before melee happens. So you've moved, you've done artillery and missile fire, and then finally you have melee. So again, melees happen simultaneously, and then you're looking at the two of the three tables I showed you before. So if you have regular troops, which could include dwarves and elves and so on, against each other, then you'd be rolling on these tables to work out how many kills you get. And a kill, it just means you remove one of the figures from play in the unit. And if you have big, bad fantasy creatures fighting each other, then you can, you should probably use this table as well. It depends, actually. You can some fantasy creatures can also count as multiples of normal troops, and they could also then fight on the normal table. They could fight on the normal table instead. So you get choices basically through the game. And then, melee happens simultaneously. So you roll for the total number of troops at the beginning on each side, and then kills happen simultaneously. And then we go into morale checks. In actual fact, a morale check would have been possible after missile. So there's this table here for instability due to excess casualties. So when each type of unit loses a certain percentage of troops, they then have to roll this number or better on 2d6 not to rout. However, there's also another morale system to be used after melee called post-melee morale. This requires a lot of calculations, although it's not as bad as you think. Actually, once you start doing it, you can just do it step by step. And this relies on the morale rating which a troop has. And I've only played a couple of times. I played once with non-fantasy figures, once with fantasy figures. Morale is a big thing. You lose a lot of troops to morale, and that also makes the game interesting. And so the only thing to then say is that, the fantasy supplement itself needs to be read before you can play, obviously. But now I've hopefully explained it, you'll understand better what they mean. So, for example, we've got halflings are really weird because they're free and they're slightly broken. Let's have a look at goblins, for example. Okay, so they have various problems. They don't like bright light. They have -1 from their morale and from attacks in bright light. But look, they fight as armored foot and defend as heavy foot. So if you remember those tables, the first big table, you would look them up as armored foot for their attacks and as heavy foot for their defense. And the morale rating is 5. So in that last post-melee morale, you would use that morale rating there. However, for example, morale for excess casualties, you would have to just decide what to do about that, because there's only the only table in the book for that is for regular troops. So I don't know, you could decide, for example, that goblins count as if they're attacking and defending as heavy, and maybe they're somewhere around here, right? They're perhaps heavy foot or elite heavy foot, and you could decide with your the person you're playing with. So that's a very brief rundown on how to play, and I will include a video in the future showing actual examples of play. But hopefully that's enough just to pique your interest and to realise it's actually possible to play this game, and it's fun. I've had 2 really fun games, and I'm looking forward to more games in the future. If you like this video, please like and please subscribe to this channel. It's a new channel, and I intend to produce more videos like this in the future, looking into how to play old or less well-known games. So thanks for watching, and happy gaming.